how do real lasting changes truly happen in the world? It's a question we grapple with constantly, right? In our lives, our communities, globally. We often find ourselves looking for that, that grand hero, the visionary leader, or maybe some sweeping mandate handed down to kickstart a transformation. But what if the most powerful changes, the ones that really stick, happen in more unexpected ways? Maybe driven by something, well, more subtle, more cultural. Today, we're diving deep into an idea captured by this phrase. It is what it is, but it will become what you make it. And that's not just, a nice sentiment. It feels more like a strategic roadmap. It helps explore how these seemingly immovable systems can actually be reshaped, not by huge pronouncements from the top, but by focused, sustained effort to create new possibilities, often from right within the system itself.
That's exactly right.
Huh.
Our mission today is to really go deep into this incredible collection of insights about how systems actually transform. And we're going to be connecting what might seem, totally unrelated worlds, the global chocolate industry.
Right.
And the philosophy of raising children. Seems like a stretch, maybe. But our goal is to understand the power of what our sources are calling cultural leverage. And what they mean by that is finding the subtle ways to shift the underlying values, the norms, the shared beliefs within a system, rather than just trying to change the rules or structures directly, from the top down.
Okay. And to help us navigate this, we're drawing from a really rich tapestry of ideas, right? We'll be pulling wisdom from figures like Seth Godin, the marketing strategist.
Yeah.
His insights are just invaluable. And even Bruce Springsteen, surprisingly.
Yeah.
His life story offers this resonant parallel. So this deep dive is really about giving you a shortcut, a way to understand these powerful, often kind of invisible mechanisms of change without you having to sift through, tons of research. Getting to that aha moment. Okay, let's unpack this then. We're starting with the global chocolate industry, which at first glance seems so simple, right? A sweet pleasure, a treat.
Yeah, just chocolate.
But our sources reveal this stark, almost unsettling picture of how these commodity systems, well, underneath that sweet surface, they can perpetuate deep injustice, even while looking perfectly rational, totally efficient from inside their own logic. It's a real paradox, isn't it?
It really is. Something so innocent, seemingly tied to something so problematic. And what's fascinating here is the foundational problem. It's really systemic. The farmers growing cocoa in places like Ghana and the Ivory Coast. And remember, these places produce the vast majority of the world's chocolate.
Right, the bulk of it.
They are among the lowest paid workers anywhere, period. And this isn't some accident, a random market outcome. It's predictable. It's structural. It's the result of a system designed around very different priorities than, say, farmer well-being.
Priorities like?
Like sheer volume, rock-bottom prices. The system, as the sources describe it, kind of grinds people down into endless hard work. Long hours, tough labor, often without rewarding them for the quality of the cocoa or innovation or taste. The focus is just elsewhere.
Wow, that sounds completely entrenched then. Like, if it's that deep, that self-reinforcing, where do you even start to make a change? My first thought goes to, direct action, protests, maybe shaming campaigns. Did our sources say anything about those? Did they work? And what are the specific forces keeping this system so stable?
Exactly. And those direct challenges often run into walls. The sources break down three interconnected forces that maintain what they call this stable equilibrium in commodity chocolate. Makes it really resistant. First, you've got the corporate industrial complex. Think about the massive global players, the household names you see everywhere.
Yeah, the big guys.
Their whole drive is relentless, pushing for scale, massive profitability, and crucially, stability in their supply chains. They need predictable, cheap volume. Hundreds of thousands of tons of cocoa beans every year. Mm-hmm. And they've perfected a system to get that at the lowest possible cost, often, at the farmer's expense.
Okay, so that's one major force. What's next?
Then you have the government regulatory system, the bureaucracies, and they find themselves in this constant balancing act. They're trying to manage social good things like labor standards, environmental impact.
The ethical side.
Right. But they're also facing immense pressure from the industry lobby. Plus, governments themselves often want stability above all else. So it's this complex dance, this negotiation, and often the outcome is, maintaining the status quo because the corporate players are just so influential.
Makes sense. Industry pressure, government balancing acts.
Yeah.
What's the third force?
And finally, there's the marketing system.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where it gets really, really clever, strategically speaking. The marketing system responds brilliantly to us, the consumers. Because let's be honest, we often prioritize convenience, price, and the social aspect of chocolate, sharing it, gifts, holidays,
Yeah, the experience around it.
over maybe the nuances of flavor or the ethical story behind the bar. And this understanding lets the system leverage existing cultural moments. Here's where it gets really interesting, turning Halloween into this massive cultural event. It isn't just about candy in general. It directly, hugely benefits the largest commodity chocolate producers. Our sources say it's not unusual for something like 15% of their entire annual sales to be tied just to Halloween.
15% from one holiday. Wow.
Yeah, it creates this enormous, almost irresistible demand for cheap, mass-produced chocolate.
That's a powerful point, and it really shows how these loops get established, doesn't it? So you get this incredibly powerful self-reinforcing feedback loop. The key metrics driving the big companies are market share and profit, not necessarily flavor, not sustainability.
Exactly.
And the cheap commodity chocolate makes these mass cultural events like Halloween possible on that huge scale, which then drives massive sales volume, which then justifies keeping the low-cost production system going, which keeps the farmers poor.
It's a perfect vicious cycle.
Yeah, very hard to break because it seems so logical from within its own rules. Almost makes you feel a bit guilty grabbing that Halloween candy, although resisting those mini bars is tough.
It absolutely does. And that conflict the consumer feels, that's part of the system's strength, in a way.
So, okay. If you're looking at a system that entrenched, that's stable, how on earth do you challenge it? Our sources tell us the breakthrough, where it started to shift, didn't come from directly confronting that system, not trying to dismantle it from the outside with protests.
Right, not the head-on approach.
Instead, it emerged by creating compelling alternatives. Showing a different way was actually possible. It's a fascinating story, really. Ingenuity over just fighting the beast.
And this raises that key question. When the usual stuff, like direct shaming or public pressure, doesn't work, what's next? What do you do then? The story of Van de Kuken, the Dutch journalist, is just a perfect example of this pivot. Back in 2003, he did exactly what you'd expect. He reported extensively on the awful reality of slave labor in the commodity chocolate market, documented it meticulously.
Yeah, shining a light on it.
Kids forced to work, dangerous conditions, all for the cocoa we eat. His initial plan was, use the publicity, use the awareness, shame governments and the big companies into changing. He thought, surely if people knew, the system would have to respond, right? Public outcry would force change.
I'm guessing it didn't quite work out like that.
Exactly. The shaming campaigns kind of fell flat. The big players didn't really budge in a meaningful way. And his frustration with that inertia, that resistance, led him to make this really crucial strategic shift. Instead of fighting from the outside as a critic, he decided to become a producer within the system.
Wow. Okay, so he started his own company.
He literally founded Tony's Chocolonely. And the name came because he felt like this lonely voice speaking out against it all.
Tony's Chocolonely. I've definitely seen those bars.
Right. And here's the kicker, the really amazing part. Tony's has now grown to capture nearly 20% to 0% of the entire Dutch chocolate market.
20%. For an ethical brand, that's huge.
It proves it wasn't just some tiny niche idea, it was viable.
So how did they succeed? What was different about their model?
Well, Tony's went with a completely different approach. They committed to full bean-to-bar vetting, which means they rigorously trace every single cocoa bean from the specific farm, the specific co-op, all the way to the final bar you hold.
Total transparency.
Exactly. And this wasn't just about making a product. It was about offering consumers a different story. A story where you, the consumer, could participate directly in a more ethical supply chain just by choosing their chocolate. It became a choice aligned with values. You could literally, eat your ethics. And that, the sources emphasize, is an incredibly powerful lever, integrating the change into everyday behavior.
That's amazing. And it wasn't just him, right? You mentioned Sean Askinosie in the U.S.
That's right. Sean Askinosie took a very similar path here, forged his own way. He implemented something called open book management. Super transparent, employees and even farmers understand the company's finances.
Really? Sharing the books?
Yeah. Combined with deep ethical sourcing, and crucially, paying dramatically higher wages to the growers. Sometimes 4 or 5 times the commodity price, a real pathway out of poverty for those families.
Wow.
And, as the sources note, kind of as a bonus, it helps that the chocolate is also really delicious.
Always a plus.
Sean brought this incredible commitment, real bravery, to what was essentially a brand new model. He proved you could be ethical and profitable. He fundamentally changed the standard, showed it was possible, and tastier.
So Tony's, Askinosie, any others pushing this?
Yeah, and then another one, Original Beans pushed this new model even further. They saw even more possibilities. They committed to using profits not just for fair wages, but to actually regenerate the landscapes. Planting trees, restoring biodiversity where the cocoa grows.
So environmental regeneration, too.
Exactly, agroforestry. And they also embraced these once-lost flavor profiles, working with unique heirloom cocoa varieties.
Like single origin coffee, but for chocolate.
Precisely. Beans like Porcelana or National. They produce distinct, amazing flavors that some people are very happy to pay a premium for. Now, if we connect this back to the bigger picture, these entrepreneurs, Toon, Sean, Original Beans, they all grasp this crucial principle. They weren't trying to change Halloween overnight. They weren't trying to transform the entire global chocolate industry with one big push. That would have been, well, likely impossible.
Okay, so if they weren't trying to change the whole system directly, what were they doing? This is where it gets really interesting, you said.
Yes. Instead, they focused on creating what the sources call leverage points. These are strategic places where their alternatives could put pressure on the existing system step by step without a direct attack.
Like finding the weak spots or the points of influence?
Kind of. For instance, governments couldn't easily claim anymore that it was just impossible to trace chocolate back to farms and ensure ethical practices.
Because these guys were doing it.
Exactly. They proved traceability was feasible. Retailers, the stores, started to realize they could maintain good year-round profits and build loyalty without relying so heavily on those big seasonal junk food pushes. They saw a new, sustainable revenue stream emerge.
Okay, so it put pressure on governments, retailers. What about consumers?
And maybe most importantly, consumers gained access to what the document calls status and affiliation through these choices. People started feeling, a sense of pride, a social connection by choosing these better options, especially when friends or colleagues started talking about them.
The social proof aspect.
Right. Suddenly, choosing a Tony's bar wasn't just about taste. It was making a statement, being part of a solution. It became a badge of honor in a way. The sources point out that just aiming for better can be tricky. It's vague. But this idea of horizontal change.
Horizontal change, what's that exactly?
It's change that spreads person to person, peer to peer. It's often harder to see than, say, one brave leader making a speech. But the sources argue it's even more important. It's this critical insight. Culture drives most systems. And culture is basically the result of all those interactions between people, not just top-down orders.
Right, like a CEO can issue a memo, but if the underlying culture doesn't support it...
It won't stick. Exactly. It's the daily choices, the shared stories, the peer influence. That's the real engine.
Okay, now, you might be thinking, chocolate and parenting, how on earth do those connect?
Yeah.
But this is where our deep dive gets really fascinating. Because as we shift from, global supply chains to the intimate world of raising kids, our sources reveal this unexpected but really profound parallel. The underlying dynamics of change, of fostering authentic growth, surprisingly similar.
Yeah, it's quite striking. And that Banksy quote captures it perfectly, almost chillingly. A lot of parents will do anything for their kids except let them be themselves.
Oof, that hits home.
Doesn't it? And this insight reveals a similar systems dynamic to the chocolate industry. You have well-intentioned parents truly believing they're providing the best support. But they can inadvertently create these really constraining environments. They might be trying to mold their kids into some preconceived ideal, the doctor, the star athlete, the perfectly behaved child.
Instead of letting them just be.
Exactly. Instead of allowing their authentic selves, their unique passions and talents to actually emerge. It's like the parental version of commodity production, trying to produce a standard outcome rather than nurturing uniqueness.
Wow. That's a tough mirror to look into as a parent, or even just as someone who cares about kids. You want the best, but sometimes the best means the best, I imagine, for them.
Precisely. Rather than what they genuinely need to become themselves.
So what's the alternative then? How do we foster that genuine growth? The sources offer this powerful counterexample, right? From Bruce Springsteen.
Yes. It's a fantastic story from his autobiography. It perfectly illustrates the alternative. He talks about being 7 years old, just glued to the TV, watching Elvis Presley on the Ed Sullivan Show.
A classic moment.
And he remembers thinking, with that intense kid logic, I've got 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 eyes, just like him. But he felt hideous compared to Elvis. Something was missing. Until he had this lightning bolt realization. The guitar. That was the missing piece.
Oh, the guitar. Simple yet profound.
It sparked everything for him.
Okay, but the crucial part is what happened next, right, with his mom.
Exactly, that's the key. The very next day, his mom didn't dismiss this sudden obsession as, just a kid thing. She didn't say, focus on your homework, or music's not a real job, or get a sensible hobby.
Which many parents might have done, let's be honest.
Right. Instead, she took him down to the local pawn shop and rented him a guitar.
Wow, just like that.
Just like that. Imagine that moment. Not a lecture, but a direct, tangible act supporting this seemingly random childhood spark. And this simple act illustrates precisely what the document calls helping children become who they are meant to become. Maybe she saw something more than just a whim. Maybe she saw the beginning of his authentic self taking shape.
So instead of molding him.
Right. Instead of trying to mold kids into predetermined outcomes, a specific career, a certain personality type, maybe interests that reflect the parent's own dreams, effective parenting creates the conditions where authentic interests can naturally emerge and then be genuinely supported. It's observation and facilitation, not imposition.
So it's really not about pressure then, or criticism, or constantly steering them towards your vision.
No. The sources suggest our job as parents is much more subtle and maybe more powerful. It's about exposure, exposing them to a wide range of things, books, experiences, people, ideas, letting them naturally find what interests them, what lights their spark. And then, critically, supporting those interests with genuine enthusiasm, believing in them unconditionally, cheering for them, being proud of who they are and who they're becoming, and maybe most importantly, being ready to catch them if they stumble or fail on that messy, unpredictable path to becoming themselves.
So being their ally, not their architect.
Beautifully put, yes.
Okay, so bringing these two threads together, chocolate and parenting.
Yeah, this raises that important question, connecting these seemingly different worlds. In both the chocolate industry and in parenting, we see this consistent, powerful truth emerging. Fostering a supportive environment that allows for authentic development, whether it's ethical chocolate or a child's true passion, rather than imposing external expectations or preset outcomes, that is the real catalyst for powerful, sustainable, genuine change. It's about creating space for what wants to grow.
So, both the shift in chocolate and this view of parenting point to one fundamental insight about how change really happens. It seems to be culture, much more than individual heroes or big mandates, that truly drives most systems transformation. It's how people interact, what they value, the stories they tell.
It's fascinating. The document explicitly notes this. The movies need heroes. Corporations need CEOs. Inventions need inventors. We love those narratives.
Right. Single figurehead.
And yet culture is the driver of most systems, and culture is the result of the interactions between and among people. That's a profound statement. It challenges so many of our usual change strategies that rely on powerful individuals dictating things from the top. It suggests that while leaders are important, their real power to make lasting change is often limited, or at least shaped, by the underlying culture.
So what does this mean for us then, as people trying to make a difference or just understand the world?
It suggests that real, sustainable change emerges not from those top-down orders, but through what the text calls horizontal change.
Okay, that term again, explain that a bit more.
It's that subtle, person-to-person cultural transmission. It's how ideas and practices spread organically, side to side, rather than top-down. It's how things shift norms and expectations across a whole system, often gradually, from the ground up, or maybe better put, from peer to peer. It's how things become the new normal because they actually resonate with people on a deeper level.
Can you give an example from the sources?
Sure. Tony's Chocolonely succeeded not just because Toon van der Kuken was charismatic or had a great plan in isolation. He succeeded because he created a tangible way for ordinary Dutch consumers to align their everyday chocolate buying with their values about fairness.
Right. The purchase became meaningful.
Exactly. Each bar bought was a small act of cultural participation in a different story about chocolate. It was a shared commitment, a collective nudge, not something dictated.
And the Springsteen example fits here too.
Perfectly. Bruce's mom didn't need a PhD in child development or to be a music expert herself. She simply saw and supported her son's emerging authentic interest. She created that fertile space for his unique path, rather than imposing her expectations.
Enabling, not dictating.
Precisely. It was about providing the opportunity that rented guitar, not forcing a specific outcome. And that subtle difference allowed a future icon to find his way and ultimately change music culture itself.
Okay, so this synthesis of examples, global industry, personal development suggests this gardener's approach to change. I like that metaphor. It really shifts the perspective away from thinking of systems like machines you just fix towards something more organic, alive.
Exactly. And the document itself concludes with this really powerful image. If you want to grow a garden, you'll need to plant seeds, but it's the ecosystem and the climate that will determine what happens after that.
So our role isn't total control.
Not at all. It immediately tells us our role is less about brute force, less about direct control, and much more about thoughtful cultivation, creating the right environment for things to thrive naturally.
So our job then, according to this metaphor, is
It's to find a plan and then create the conditions for our project to spread from person to person within and across the systems that already exist. It's not about controlling every leaf on every plant. It's about nurturing the garden, understanding its needs, fostering an environment where what you plant has the best chance to flourish and spread. Kind of like an idea going viral, but organically.
Okay, that makes sense. What are the key elements this gardener metaphor highlights for actually doing change?
Well, it captures several really crucial elements that we often overlook. First, it emphasizes patience with process. Gardens don't transform instantly, right? You plant a seed, you don't get a full harvest the next day.
Right. Takes time.
Similarly, systems, especially entrenched ones like commodity chocolate, don't shift overnight. Those entrepreneurs, Tony's, Askinosie, Original Beans, they built their alternatives over years, patiently showing they were viable, building trust, slowly attracting followers. It was a long game, sustained effort, not a quick fix.
Okay. Patience. What else?
Second, it highlights ecosystem thinking. A good gardener doesn't just stare at one plant. They tend the soil, the water, the light, the connections between everything.
Using the whole picture.
Exactly. So when we approach systemic change, we need to think beyond just individual actors or single interventions. We have to consider how our actions interact with existing culture, economics, social forces, the whole web. Like, if you want to change a team's meeting culture, you have to ask, why do they meet so much? Is it about visibility? Is it a proxy for engagement? What are the underlying needs or fears being met by the current system?
That's a great point. See the whole system. What's third?
Third, it stresses understanding local conditions. Good gardeners know what works in one climate might fail in another. They adapt. They don't impose a one-size-fits-all solution.
Right. Context matters.
Hugely. Tony's chocolate only took off in the Netherlands, partly because Dutch consumers were already becoming more receptive to ethical consumption stories. The soil was fertile, so to speak. You have to understand your specific environment, the unique cultural, economic, social landscapes where you're trying to plant your seeds. What values resonate there? What stories work there?
Makes sense. Patience, ecosystem thinking, local conditions. You mentioned 4 elements.
And fourth, a healthy garden often benefits from multiple plantings. Diversity makes it resilient. Monocultures are vulnerable.
Like not putting all your eggs in one basket.
Exactly. The chocolate transformation is happening in part because you had multiple entrepreneurs, Tony's, Askinosie, Original Beans, creating different but complementary alternatives. They weren't all doing the exact same thing. One focused on traceability, another on farmer wages, another on biodiversity. Each added their own flavor, their own approach. Together, they created more resilient, vibrant movement for change that was harder to ignore or extinguish.
Okay, this is powerful stuff. The wisdom here, from chocolate to child rearing, seems like it extends way beyond those areas, right? Like whether you're looking at huge issues like climate change or maybe educational reform or workplace culture or even just personal habits. These core principles seem to apply. This gardener's approach feels universal.
It really does. Which leads to the practical question. How do you actually apply this gardener's approach to whatever challenge you're facing, big or small? Our sources give us 5 actionable principles for finding and activating those leverage points in any system. Really practical steps for becoming that cultural gardener.
Okay, let's hear them. Principle number 1.
First, and maybe most crucial, understand the system. Before you even think about changing anything, you have to map the forces keeping things as they are. What are the feedback loops? Who benefits from the status quo? What stories do people tell themselves about why things are this way? Often stories that reinforce inertia.
So diagnose before prescribing, like with the meeting example. Understand why before trying to change it.
Exactly. You need to grasp the system's internal logic, even if you disagree with it, before you can hope to influence it.
Got it. Understand the system. What's second?
Second, create compelling alternatives. Just criticizing what exists, even if you're right, rarely works long term. You need to develop options that not only address the problems, but also serve people's deeper needs. Make the better way also the more attractive way.
The one people want to choose.
Right. Like Tony's making ethical chocolate delicious and accessible, not just, dutifully ethical. Has to appeal on multiple levels.
Okay, understand. Create alternatives.
Third, find your leverage points. Look for those places where a small, focused nudge can ripple through the system and create bigger shifts. And the key insight here is that these leverage points are often cultural, not just structural. Meaning they're in the stories people tell, the examples they follow, the social proof they look for from peers. Shifting mindsets and shared beliefs often changes behavior more effectively than just changing a rule on paper.
Interesting. Cultural leverage points. Fourth principle.
Fourth, build horizontal networks. Shift your focus away from top-down mandates. Concentrate instead on fostering that person-to-person spread of ideas and practices. Create ways for early adopters, the influencers, to easily invite others into these new possibilities. That's how cultural change really catches fire and sustains itself.
Okay, horizontal networks. And the final principle.
And finally, echoing the gardener metaphor, tends the ecosystem. Remember, you're not controlling outcomes directly, you're creating conditions. So be prepared to adapt, to learn, to pivot as your interventions interact with the complex forces already at play. Plant, tend, observe, adjust. It's an ongoing process.
That's a fantastic framework. Understand, create, leverage, network, tend.
Yeah, and Bruce Lee's wisdom fits here so well. Have no way as way, no limitation as limitation. It captures that flexibility you need. Neither the chocolate reformers nor effective parents succeeded by rigidly sticking to one plan. They stayed responsive, open to possibilities, while holding on to their deeper purpose.
And it's important to acknowledge, right, that the chocolate industry still has a long way to go. Parenting challenges obviously persist. But these examples really demonstrate that even entrenched systems can shift when people commit to creating compelling alternatives and making them accessible, making them attractive.
Exactly. Change happens not through force, not through mandates that people often resist anyway. It happens through that patient, dedicated work of cultural gardening. Planting better possibilities, nurturing them, tending the conditions for their growth, letting them spread person to person.
So what's the takeaway for you listening to this? As Hesiod, the ancient Greek poet, reminded us, a man's best treasure is a thrifty tongue. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't the grand pronouncement, the loud demand. It's the quiet, persistent demonstration.
Showing, not just telling.
Inviting, not demanding. Creating space for others to discover what they might already be ready for or to embrace a better way.
Yeah, the path forward seems to require both that entrepreneur's courage to create those alternatives and that parent's wisdom to trust and allow authentic development. In chocolate, in life, transformation seems to emerge when we stop trying to control everything and start wisely and patiently, creating the conditions where better possibilities can take root and spread.
So this deep dive leaves us with maybe a final thought for you to carry forward. What if the biggest changes aren't waiting for some hero, but just for you to plant a better seed right where you are and tend to its growth? Maybe that idea of an unlived life isn't just about personal dreams, but also about not engaging in the subtle, patient, but profoundly impactful work of cultural gardening in your own corner of the world. Something to think about.